Brilliant to see you all. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh,
Absolutely awesome group. Look at these people. Um,
what's
I hope
this?
I hope you met some lovely people in your breakouts. I trust you did because I know how great this group is. Um, Welcome. My name's Judy Rees, and this is Clean Language and Psychological Safety with Robert. Robert, could you raise your hand, your electronic hand, because that will pull you up to the top. There we go. You can now see Robert Moreno. Robert, thank you for coming, and thank you for being the inspiration and yeah, the idea behind this event. And in the next 84 minutes, we're going to do some exploring of clean language and psychological safety. Before we get rolling, I'd love to know what everybody would like to happen in this session. I can't guarantee that we can achieve everything that you would like, but let's do our best. Please write in the chat, what would you like to happen in this session? Please add your comments there. Now, not everybody is able to unmute themselves or to reveal themselves on camera. If you are even slightly able to do either of those things, please do so. And please, 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 if you can put your camera on, it will make a huge difference both to your engagement in the session and to other people's engagement in the session. It's much harder for people to stay engaged if there's a blank screen. We need to see people. People are designed to see people. Steve.
And if you quite reasonably, if you've read the research and you know that looking at a picture of yourself is actually not really brilliant for your old psychological well-being all day, you can actually mute or hide your own picture while being visible to others. The only thing I would say there is if you get an itchy nose, just be careful how you scratch it. Apart from that, it works brilliantly. But if you go up to the top three dots, don't click stop video, but hide self view is right down second from bottom. And that means you don't have to stare at yourself. If you, yeah, if you find that distracting.
Thanks, Steve. So we've got a few things coming into the chat. Get some new ideas about psychological safety, contribute creating psychological safety, especially in a one-off retreat, practical ways, add to your tool sets, tips, guide my organization through culture set. One of the things I think about the group here is that we got a lot of people who are in relatively large organizations. A lot of events that I tend to organize attract a lot of freelance facilitators. That's not been the case for this one. We've got a relatively large proportion of people working in organizations. Also, people who are going to be watching the recording, there's a lot who are in large organizations. So that's going to be a slightly interesting mix of people. And I think that you're going to get some really, really useful ideas. So all these things that are coming in the chat, high value to give us a bit of a steer of where we might go here. So here's how the session is going to pan out. For the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to do a quick interview with Robert, who was the inspiration of this session. He said, I use clean language to build psychological safety in my teams, the teams that I work with. I wanted to find out more about that. A few of the people on the call were in the class where he said that. So they were also inspired and said, yes, 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 let's have a public event. So that's what happened. So 20 minutes of an interview. Then we'll do a few breakouts where you can just toss some ideas around, which will help you to prompt you to come up with your own questions for Robert. We'll have a little bit of Q&A from the audience, as it were. And then we will split the group because there are also a mixture of people with quite a lot of clean experience and people who are completely new to clean language here. So we're going to split the group a little bit to see into those groups, experienced and inexperienced. For the inexperienced, we'll do a little bit of taster stuff so that there's a bit of knowledge and into the room for beginners about clean. and the more experienced people will do something different. And we will finish on the dot of 5:30 in the UK, 90 minutes from our start time. Is that what everybody was expecting? Or the kind of thing? Excellent. So let's get going. Oh, if you would like to, you can pin myself and Robert's picture. That will make us big relative to the rest of the group. For you. I would strongly prefer not to be spotlighted, because that means I can't see the group. So
for those of you who've seen me do that in the past before, that was aimed at me. That was, Steve, don't you dare spotlight me or there'll be hell to pay. But to do it yourself, just go to those 3 dots top right again, and on the person you want to pin, and it'll be obvious to you. You can do it for those 2 people.
Thanks, Steve. And of course, I can pin myself. Ooh. And I can pin Robert if I wanted to, but that would also make me big. So, Robert, you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll, Judy.
Excellent. So, you recently said that you use clean language with the teams you work with to build psychological safety. So, what have you done, and what has been the effect on psychological safety within your team?
Well, I think so I suppose as we get started here, a definition of terms would be appropriate. So psychological safety, the a lot of different ways to slice and dice the concept, but at its core, oh, and I just in terms of citations and references, the framework and the methodology that I'm working off of is by Dr. Timothy Clark, who runs the Leader Factor, and I have links for these sorts of things, and happy to share them. He's an Oxford-trained social scientist, researcher, and developed survey instruments and this sort of thing. But so it's his framework that I'm working within, just to give proper credit. So what I appreciate is that he really boils things down to their most useful essences. So in terms of psychological safety, what is it? It's a culture of rewarded vulnerability. So we can break that down even further. What is culture? Culture is, again, a lot of things, but at its essence, it's the way we interact. It's patterns of interaction. What is vulnerability? Vulnerability is the you could say the threat of loss, the threat of harm. It's risk. And then reward. What's reward? Well, it's a reinforcement. So when we say a culture of rewarded vulnerability, we can say that this is a patterns of interaction that reinforce risk taking, that reinforce opening up to exposure in some way. The level of vulnerability that each of us brings to the table, or is willing to, I should say, is different. We all know that we all have, there's a part of us that is constantly scanning the environment to keep us safe, to make sure we're well, to give us our best life. So it's natural for us to want to avoid vulnerable situations. It's normal for us to, particularly in these are, and I'm speaking here of social situations. We know work and family life, anywhere where 2 are gathered. We put ourselves, or have the potential to put ourselves at risk. And if we find ourselves in environments or in circumstances or situations where we're mocked, we're penalized, we're shamed even when we do something that is vulnerable. And note that these vulnerable acts are different for everyone. And side note, what's vulnerable for an entry-level employee or the newest recruit is gonna be different than what's maybe vulnerable for a C-suite person or the project manager or a president or a head of state. You know, vulnerability is different for different people depending on what the perception of loss or risk or threat is. So when we subject ourselves or find ourselves in circumstances where that vulnerability is there, we then go further into thinking, and I love how Dr. Clark, separates this. There's the blue zone and the red zone. We know we're in the blue zone when our self-censoring threat detection instincts are down, those walls are down. We're not in that versus the red zone where it's more of a fear response, where we edit ourselves, we hide, we sort of modify what's authentic for us so that we can't be punished for it. Because some of that that social stuff really hurts. And we can think of, many of us can go back to grade school, grammar school, or early on, moments perhaps in class when we maybe asked an innocent question out of genuine curiosity, and perhaps a teacher or professor may have shamed us or otherwise embarrassed us, or so in some way. Or this can happen socially too. It happens with friends and colleagues, certainly family, and of course certainly at work, in very overt and sometimes covert and maybe not intentional ways, but we learn these habits, we learn these sort of patterns of interaction. So the opportunity here is to become aware of the fact that we all have this need to feel safe, at a minimum, physical safety for sure. And certainly as employers, we know, well, if you happen to be an employer or manager, we're responsible for creating the conditions of safety, physical safety for sure. And there are plenty of regulations and safeguards and guardrails for that sort of thing. But what outside of the most egregious violations, where you need some intervention from HR or legal or whatever, in the day-to-day, some of these dynamics of performance are very challenging. And we often take as just the way things are, that we should be, I mean, it can be, it's not a universal accepted thing, but that's just how it is. That's the way things are done. You're paying your dues. When I was in Europe, all of these
and all
reasons,
of that,
and all of that.
A culture of rewarded vulnerability. Psychological safety is a culture of rewarded vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to creating that culture of rewarded vulnerability, you used clean language. How?
That's right. So what I love about the Clark model is it gives the big overarching structure. And before I talk about the specifics of how I use the clean language questions, which for me are more of the sort of interstitial, this is sort of, if psychological safety is one of the large sort of internal structures that an individual, a leader, an organization can have as a mental model that then informs their structures and informs their patterns, so on and so forth, then clean language becomes the way to navigate between these different levels, these different ways of being, these different social exchanges, because they require a fair amount of humility and willingness to do more asking than telling. And I think it's funny, Timothy Clark said he talks about the ask to tell ratio. I think it's Peter Senge who talked about the difference between advocacy and inquiry. So in any event, there's a curiosity to sort of I have the solution ratio. So how does clean language work within the culture of rewarded vulnerability? Well, if you think about stage one is inclusion safety. And in every stage, there are what is called a social exchange. So in stage one in the Clark model, this is inclusion in exchange. Well, if you are included, if you are human, you are authentic, and you are harmless. So the only grounds for exclusion is harm or the threat of harm. And within this, there is the opportunity for interacting, and beyond interacting is connecting in a genuine and authentic and sincere way across lines of affinity. And so, we know it's easy to connect with those with whom we are similar. Less so connecting with those with whom we are dissimilar. So it does take a great deal of willingness, and I think, Steve, you mentioned at one of the sessions the clean stance. There's a sort of mindset that one has to have to be willing to open, to be curious enough to listen in. And so within the inclusion safety realm, you can think about, there's asking for someone's opinion, and they may give it, but it goes no further. Maybe you're here, you're included. What do you have to say? What's your idea? But then it just sort of stays at a superficial level. And so what I like about the way I would use clean language within level 1 inclusion safety is when we offer an opinion or into a group or get some responsibility, we can use the clean language questions to go even further, to get to those more subtle layers of meaning, some of those deeper interests. And from a deeper space, truly have a kind of connection that it's more universal. Sometimes in these situations we can be arbitrary or selective with how we do this. I've loved how clean language has allowed me to make this just a matter of course. So in terms of the questions, someone offers an opinion, and thinking on a recent sort of group problem-solving situation that's cross-functional, cross-departmental, over Zoom, with autonomous agents doing all sorts of interesting things, using those clean language questions to really get to roots, to meanings, to shared definitions, uncovers a lot of miscommunications. And as Steve said, this really stuck with me, miscommunication is the default. And indeed, I've found that to be true, simply because we all are existing within our own reality tunnel, to use the Robert Anton Wilson model. We've all got that.
So can I press you on the example?
Yeah.
So you're in this big Zoom meeting, lots of autonomous agents.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody offers an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
What I think I've heard you say is that the first thing is what's been called a clean stance, which is a willingness to be open to someone offering an opinion.
That's right.
Then what happens?
So first comes the willingness, and then comes the action, then comes the behavior, then comes asking the genuine question, and come what may, being willing to respond with even more curiosity, because particularly when we're solving some tricky problems or wicked problems, you know, each of these perspectives is entirely unique, and we can, considering the fact that we can see things from so many angles, but not all angles, we can be better informed by asking these genuine questions, particularly of those who don't have ultimate decision power, who ultimately aren't the ones signing the checks or giving the green check marks. So, for instance, in a recent sort of problem-solving couple of sessions, some of the opportunities came up because of certain assumptions we made about the technological capabilities of some of our clients. So we had been working in contexts where these facilities, we on the one hand were communicating through email, but these facilities, really their technical proficiency were not where we assumed them to be. But we didn't.
They weren't reading the
that.
emails. They weren't reading the emails.
Or if they were, didn't know where to go with them, or weren't quite able to, you know, what we realized is we could facilitate a better process through going old-fashioned paper form, going door to door, taking steps to just way more analog. But it took some time to understand that, oh, there's a problem at a space prior to where we thought it was. But it did take some unpacking. It did take some of that some real learning, and a real willingness to be wrong, which goes into that stage too, which is learner safety, not knowing, having questions, making mistakes, and it being safe to do so, safe to ask why, safe to ask how, safe to try something and fail at it, as a learning opportunity. So that's been the real opportunity there within that second stage, is what must we learn? What don't we know? What are the known unknowns, and what might the unknown unknowns be? So this really does, the clean language questions do offer some of this kind of thinking that asks us to consider alternative hypotheses. And very often, and this is where the social piece comes in with psychological safety, we might make a lot of assumptions. Oh, it's because so-and-so is incompetent, so-and-so doesn't know their job, or so-and-so is whatever. Never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to ignorance, but I think this is collective learning, where that wasn't even something we had thought about, to think about, or to learn about. So that opens up inclusion safety, and that clean stance and that curiosity allows us to move to the second level, which is learner safety.
So what might be an example of a clean language question that you might use at that learner safety stage 2 of Clarke's model? What questions might you ask?
So one of the so what's working, what's not working is kind of a standard sort of, what's the status of X project? What's working? What's not working? What resources might you need? What support do you need?
Those are ordinary questions, not clean
ordinary
questions. Yeah.
And typically from what's not working. is my favorite question. And when X
Oh,
happens.
that would. Robert, you froze. Could you repeat?
Absolutely.
From favorite question.
Yeah. So from X, I'm having X problem or X struggle. My favorite question in that instance, because of the where it can take the mind as a starting place. Well, when X problem happens, what would you like to happen? And that then puts us in a strong position to explore together, because we don't know if it's possible. We don't know what needs to happen. It opens up the opportunity to understand what led up to it, contributing factors, who are the other stakeholders we might need to query. Is this are there some social influences? Are there some environmental influences? That it's a launch pad, really.
Mm-hmm. So
And from there,
just to repeat that question then. So let's take the example. They're not opening the emails. And when they're not opening the emails, what would you like to have happen? And that's a launch pad for learning.
That's a launch pad. That's right. And that took us to understanding what are the needs of these customers? What are the needs of these clients? What is it like, you know, to be this client? And this allows for greater empathy, actually. And this is a huge component of, I believe, both clean language and psychological safety as a mindset, is this willingness to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, metaphorically. What is it like to be them? How is our message coming across, if at all? So what we learned was we learned that these facilities have limited resources, limited exposure, limited and this small change in our outreach in this particular instance led to us making some necessary changes to fulfill our contractual requirements. So it's got very practical applications, of course. This is really about doing the work and honoring our agreements and delivering to the customer in the final analysis.
And what I think I'm hearing is that for you, clean language is, if you like, a how to this. The what is psychological safety. The clean language is a how. You've got lots and lots of tools. You're obviously very experienced, very knowledgeable. What is it about clean that makes the difference when it comes to psychological safety?
Well, this goes into stage 3, which is contributor safety. So contributor safety is the third stage, and this is all about performance. This is the social exchange is autonomy with guidance in exchange for results. And this is where this is the execution stage. This is where we make things happen. And within this, and again, this is all Dr. Clarke's work I'm citing here. He talks about 3 levels of accountability: task, project, and outcomes. He also speaks about our ask to tell ratio. And most of us at some level, many of us, I should say, would like to have maximum autonomy. And what the clean language allows us to do is do less telling, less do it this way, solve it this way, I have the answer. And it flips our ask to tell ratio toward the asking, which allows for the individual to learn, yes, but also to contribute, because we do have an innate need to contribute, to make a difference, to contribute our talents, to contribute our skill, our expertise. And this is very affirming of us. And when we use clean language questions, we can, with the clean stance and the sort of mindset of the psychological safety as the what, we can get to how will the individual tap into their own strengths, their own creativity, their own resourcefulness to deliver more results, to perform, to contribute and make a difference. This is this is vital to the success of your enterprise, your organization, your team, your project, or whatever. And also very affirming for an individual to know that I'm in spaces and places where my talents are utilized. I can. It's not all of who we are, but it's certainly much of what we do, and how we do it. And when we take a clean stance and ask more than we tell appropriately, over time we generate that pattern where, especially if we find a lot of dependency we know there are those we go to frequently who have the answers, who can fix anything. But this is the place where we put others in a strong position to contribute in their own way. And should they make a mistake, should we fail to achieve perfection, we know we have the learner safety and make it a teachable moment and learn and grow from it. So that's really that performance zone. Did I answer that, Judy?
Yeah, perfect. And what I'm going to do in a moment is invite the group to jump into breakout rooms to think about what they would like to ask Robert. The reason we do breakout rooms here is one bit of a change of pace because everybody's been sitting quietly listening. The other is because what we've found is that people come up with better questions if they have even 2 or 3 minutes to talk about it before they do it. So that's my invitation, is to jump into the breakout rooms, spend a couple of minutes talking to at least one other person about what questions you have for Robert. Does that seem like a reasonable next step? If you can't join the breakouts, fine. But if you could give me a steer that that's the case, that would be really helpful, because that will make it so that we can not leave anybody on their own. Okay. In just a moment, setting the timer, I'm going to give you 5 minutes in the breakout rooms to think about what questions you would like to ask Robert. Okay with everybody? Robert, you can join or not as you prefer. Welcome back, everybody. So, what are some of the questions that you now have for Robert? Please write in the chats when we get to answering some of the questions. I'll ask you to unmute and speak your question out loud. But for the first bit, let's start by getting some questions in the chat. I'm also going to share in the chat the links to Timothy Clark's work. That's not clean language. It's a separate discipline about psychological safety. So those are in the chat. People who want to look up Timothy Clark, there are some links that Robert's shared. So Frank, straight in there with a question. We'll come back to you in a moment. Have a few seconds to write your questions. Last few seconds. Okay. Oh, hello, John. We're coming up to an hour in. Is anybody else hearing echo? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Let's ask some questions then. Clem, would you be willing to stand as the avatar for all the people who've asked for an example? Speak out loud your question.
Yes, okay. Let me try and phrase it as usefully as possible. So yes, Robert, we were wondering if you could provide like a really specific, concrete example, a situation with a team or an individual where you used a series of clean language questions to kind of help build that psychological safety and sort of talk us through step by step.
So the part of the challenge of this is the step-by-step sort of logical linear structure that it sounds like you'd like are the 4 stages, which are important to know. The clean language is the sort of the means, part of the ways to navigate through those. And there aren't, how should I put this? It's not something that happens in a predictable pattern of sequence that step A leads to step B, leads to step C. Oftentimes, some of the clean language questions can maybe take us to circular places where we might have to drill down and reinforce, or we might go into a metaphor, or something may be opened up that is completely unrelated to the matter at hand. And I guess why I'm saying that is some of the conversations, and this is part of the power of clean language, is that it can take us to places that are very emotional in nature, very sensitive places. So in individual contexts, when I advise, for instance, and again, I have just out of confidentiality, but I speak in very general terms. And in an individual level, we're chewing on a problem. Because I'm looking at the dynamics, and oftentimes I'll map these things visually. Here's person A, person B, situation, just to have some reference, either on a mapping software or on a board. Looking at where the vulnerable spaces are, looking at who's got some risk, where are their blocks, and where are some of those blocks correlated with some sort of either defense mechanism, like who's got something to lose here that is causing a wall to come up? What's at risk? Where might we encourage more vulnerability or create conditions for more vulnerability primarily within ourselves? So if I'm consulting my my former partner and CEO, really where are the spots that we're identifying here where we need to reward some vulnerability or model some vulnerability, and then validate that. That's really part of it, is calling it out, speaking it into, that this is a topic of conversation, that this is going to be part of the dialogue. But again, seeing the social dynamics, seeing the interactions, knowing where they are, knowing where to apply my leverage, knowing where to step in and encourage and reward more vulnerability, and then hearing and listening. And again, sometimes it takes repeated interventions because of old legacy issues, calcified habits. We might be undoing or working to sort of dispel some old stuff. I often think of, in the Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy lands in Munchkinland, can all come out to play. Is it safe for us to sing? Is it safe for us to have a rich and robust conversation? Then and only then can we move into really having a discussion about the real issues. So, Clem, I guess to answer your question in a very long-winded way, the steps are get to the point where we can talk about the issues. Dr. Clark talks about the challenger safety as being the pinnacle, and this is where we have air cover in exchange for candor and low social friction. If we can't debate ideas on their merit, if we can't have a conversation about the tactic, the process, the approach, the plan, the strategy, because we have not enough trust that I'm safe, then it's really we end up in those situations where we all agree, right? We all agree, and then we don't all agree. And so this has been the benefit of those clean language questions. The clean language questions really help guide us toward that spot where we can challenge the status quo, where we can change the structures in meaningful ways. But if they're based on, we may not be able to make meaningful change because we don't have full understanding of the problem, because folks are self-censoring. They're not bringing up the true challenges. They're not bringing in the real reasons that things aren't working. They're not, I don't want to stick my neck out or I'll get my head chopped off. When we're as leaders, it's incumbent upon us to really work toward that high intellectual friction. And that's not easy for folks all the time, because my idea is me. This is different. This is distinct. And only when we have that fertile ground of inclusion and can we ever go to the higher steps. So I apologize that it's not very linear, but this is a very non-linear process. It's very organic and messy in the best way possible.
Thank you. Marie has a follow-on question to that, really. Marie, are you able to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. This was fascinating just to listen to. I feel I'm going to have to listen to this whole session again on my own time. Yeah, so I was wondering, as a facilitator, this is based on my personal reality, is that often I'll come into a group, and of course I do ask questions during the intake process, and I try to learn as much as possible and not walk into a trap, but sometimes you have surprises. So when you walk into a group where there's very little or no psychological safety at all, and you notice that people are afraid to actually speak their mind, is it possible? And if so, how would it be possible to create at least a modicum of psychological safety, like just plant a seed, perhaps, would it be possible to do that using clean language, and how would you go about doing it?
Well, I would defer to Judy on that. And in fact, I think I know of one exercise that you've done that I found to be very useful in this way. But I think definitely in terms of facilitating, you know, just whatever context you're in or situation or room you happen to be working, the first step is the modeling, and often that is the most instructive part. As a facilitator, we always come in with a different air about us, don't we? There's a certain flexibility and flowiness to what we do, and certainly in your pre-frame, kind of stating your intentions, priming the opportunity. And then Judy, if you could speak to, you do a certain exercise when you are ... at your best, or when you are such and such at your best, that's like what? And every time I've utilized that tactic, it becomes an opportunity for the group to generate the sort of patterns of interaction that they want. And this brings to mind another great catchphrase that little slogan that Dr. Clark mentions, which is, we are all cultural architects. We influence and are influenced by culture, and we do so by design or by default. So there's definitely a sense of intentionality that we can bring to this. But Judy, I'd love to hear your take on that, because you do this so well.
So this activity, which was originally devised by Caitlin Walker, to give credit, we often do and it looks like a very ordinary warm-up activity or icebreaker activity. And we ask people to come along to a session having thought about the question. Typically, when you are working at your best, you are like what? And we tell them there's no right or wrong answers. We give some examples. You know, some people like an express train, some people like a butterfly drifting around a garden, somebody else is really efficient and organized. Whatever your answer is fine. Do that. Everybody comes along, probably with it drawn on a post-it note, and then we pop them into twos and invite them to use clean language questions to find out more about what the other person has drawn. We use what kind of X and is there anything else about X, which are the two most commonly used clean language questions, where X stands for one or more of the other person's words. We give them 2 minutes one way, swap over 2 minutes the other way. So first ask, then be asked the questions. After a total of 4 minutes, you swap them round, swap pairs. If you're in a room with this happening, it's noisy and buzzy and exciting, and there's lots going on. We did it outdoors with a group at the European Parliament earlier in the year. It's good fun. Everybody thinks it's just a warm-up activity. But in the instructions, we say, look for difference. Look for what's different between you and the other person. And what typically happens is people find difference. They find similarity. Of course, they're probably all doing the same job in a group, but they find difference. Steve?
I think I can give an example. And I know you're not interviewing me, but I hope it will be useful. Judy and I started working in the Better Conversations Foundation just 2 weeks ago. And the Better Conversations Foundation is about promoting the use of clean language in the world. That's what it's for. If anybody wants to know more about it, we'd be delighted to talk about it, because we're both working there part-time now. The thing about that culture is it's a company founded on the principle of we use clean language. It's part of the interview process. It's part of everything and how it works. And what I've noticed is that in comparison with other places, the level of curiosity and it's okay is very, very high. And what happens is an encouragement to use and follow clean language models, not by rote, but by stance as much as anything else. And whenever there's a misunderstanding, and I'm not quite sure about that, there's an easy default into, oh, what kind of? And it just trips and happens. And I think one of the things that Robert has said I can turn into concrete is when you change the quotient from, Robert, what did you say? Change the quotient from the ask-to-tell ratio.
Yeah.
That seems to be something that is concrete and relevant. When you change the ask-to-tell ratio, things happen there that indicate curiosity, that get rid of misunderstandings to some extent, that can just take you perhaps one level. And this feels to me historically and personally like the spirals are either going up or it's going down. It gets better because it gets better, or it gets worse because it gets worse. That might not be true, but it's a bit polemic. But yeah, I'll quit while I'm hopefully ahead, and hopefully that's useful.
Thank you, Steve.
Just
Robert.
may I just briefly on this, the in terms of a very practical behaviors, I'd highly encourage the group to download the behavior guide. I'm looking at it now, and one of the as concrete action steps, and this really relates to the exercise that you're talking about. Two of them are, when you think, how do I help others to feel included? Move to mutual discovery quickly. And so, again, the clean language questions in these breakout groups. What kinds of questions do you have for so-and-so? What do you want to get out of this course? What would you like to have happen? As long as we're delving to appropriate levels for the context, these conversations will feel just less obligatory and more, just really participatory. And then they also create, Marie, just going back to starting your sessions, bonding opportunities to bond or bridge, whatever the case may be, creating that comfort, creating that sense of belonging, creating a bit of a, I loved how we started this with the Hangout chat rooms as a prior to the business at hand. So,
Inga, you have a question.
Yes. As much as I think that clean language can invite somebody to come to that rewarded vulnerability, I don't think that the clean language questions can create psychological safety. So, I mean, clean language can work very well if there is psychological safety. It can bring people to come to that point that they feel more safe. But if there is no psychological safety, I don't think the clean language questions can help.
Interesting. What do you think, Robert?
We had a great conversation about this, and this was part of what led to this conversation in the first place was, and this stuck with me, Judy. You said clean language does not create the psychological safety. People do. And I agree. The language is just the vehicle. This can get us there. But it's the attention toward these behaviors, these ideas, and feeling okay with our use of them that combined with the clean language. And again, clean language, I think, is brilliant and entirely useful and wonderful. It's not the only option. It's a powerful one. I believe that it facilitates the emergence of this very invisible but very palpable quality of interaction. We know that the clean language questions can, if misused, can be dangerous. But we all can harm each other through, even we take a clean language question, we change our tone, it's got a completely different feeling. What would you like to have happen versus, and what would you like to have happen? You know, sarcasm, you know, just we know that we're never not communicating. And if miscommunication is, as Steve says, the default, then it behooves us to be, to overdo, but to have a very open and transparent declaration of intent to cultivate such a condition. Does that make sense, Inga?
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with you. I agree with you. And Judy, your words stuck with me. It's not the clean language. It is we who create the psychological safety. I agree that those habits of interaction become normalized, and then ultimately become the culture we operate in.
And clean language can be a way of encouraging people to inculcate those habits. So we have a friend who has clean language questions stuck all over her notice board at work. Her colleagues are now stealing those post-it notes with the questions on because they think they're so useful. Now, the post-it note with the question on it is not the magic, but it's part of the magic. A key element of the magic is everybody knowing that those questions are a good thing to ask. And a part of the magic is the curiosity. And underpinning the magic of curiosity is a realization that other people are different from you. Because if you know that everybody's exactly the same as you are, then you're not going to be curious and you're not going to ask questions. The clean language questions enable you to very quickly reveal difference, and that can be high value. One more, Steve.
Tiny intervention. I think there's a small but really important difference between us saying we know we're all different and empathetically and in a heartfelt way knowing that we're all different. Because everybody who says, oh, I know we're all different, 10 seconds later can be absolutely, how can you possibly think that? How can you possibly say that? Hang on, I thought you said you knew we're all different. So knowing it and feeling it and living it are two different things.
Indeed. One more question from Leslie, and then we're going to do another activity. Is Leslie still here? Yeah.
Yes, I am. My question stemmed more around like, what is the realistic expectation on a timeline? If I'm meeting with someone and maybe there's no safety built at all in there, this is our first meeting or second meeting, or maybe there's just a little bit. Realistically, how quickly could I move through those stages using clean language in order to build that psychological safety from inclusion to learner to contributor to so on and so forth? That's my question.
Yes, it's an excellent question. And the thing is, we are all at some degree in our interactions. We have some degree of psychological safety. It's on a continuum. It's either low or non-existent or high. And it doesn't stay there. It's not something that you check off a list and say, we've got it, no problem. Every interaction is an opportunity to edify, to reinforce, to affirm our commitment to those 4 levels. And it can, I think one of the realities here is that particularly, you know, most organizations want a person to bring their whole self to work. And a person and an organization that expects that must engage the whole person. And what that means is that because we have families, because we have our own inner worlds, because we have the world is a strange and interesting and challenging place, every day may be different. So whereas we might have it between you and I, which is a very, a microculture, we have these subcultures, and then the macroculture, an organization, for instance, the sort of aggregate of all the interaction patterns from every individual and every team and every group, they change. So you and I might be might ourselves operate with high psychological safety. We can get to the hard-hitting ideas and debate them on their merit, and just have that wonderful creative abrasion. But we might find ourselves on teams where that is not the case. So there's a lower level. We might need more reinforcement earlier on, even at inclusion. And so this is more of a process, not a destination. And as such, it's not something we can we don't rest. The work continues, but you know when you have it because there are telltale signs. People are honest and open and authentic, and we can sense that. We're all pretty good when we really go there and tune into each other. We sense authenticity, we sense good intention. We know what some of the hallmarks are, that we can ask questions, we can make mistakes, we can try, we can experiment as a matter of course, as something that's normalized. We regularly can contribute and give of our talents and make differences and suggest and deliver and perform and win. And sometimes even that might be vulnerable. It might not, in some contexts, be safe to succeed for reasons. And then certainly when we can reimagine, when we can really think about how to change things for the better, whether it's structures, whether it's reevaluating our values, whether it's really having hard conversations about how we relate, that stage 4 level is the place of innovation. One of Dr. Clarke's great slogans is create a sanctuary of inclusion and an incubator of innovation. And innovation is really about renewal, about staying relevant, about staying fresh. And it's hard to get there if you're gridlocked in interpersonal or even intrapersonal stuff, because we all have stuff. So it's never really, there's no point at which you can say, we've got it, we can go home, what's next? This is ongoing, and it takes a lot of coffee and sugar and willingness and love to do it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, let's do another quick activity. First, I'm going to ask you to take part in the poll that I've just launched. How much experience of clean language do you have? Because I think we've got the full range of levels of experience in the room. We've got people like John and Frank who've been doing this stuff for ages and ages and ages. Inga, thanks for coming. Anyone who else drops off has to drop off. I've just shared in the chat, by the way, if you want some free clean language training, email me, because I've got the opportunity to invite a few people on a free training. It's an online training, 5 times 1 hour in the early new year. If that would be of interest, please drop me an email and I'll get you included. Okay. So everybody 11 people have participated out of 16. Anyone else want to say how much experience of clean language do you have? Really useful to know.
I think you know where I am on that.
Okay, I'm going to hit the end poll button. And this is something I haven't done this before, so I'm just going to see what happens if I create some breakout rooms based on the poll. Oh, that's worked. Okay.
Don't sound so surprised. It's like, oh, it worked.
Yeah, I'm astonished. It worked. Here's what's going to happen. In a moment, I'm going to invite the people who said I've at least learned the basics to jump out into breakout rooms and talk about, having heard all of this, what would you like to happen next? I'm putting this question in the chat. Please use some clean language questions to ask each other what you'd like to happen next and what needs to happen to make a plan. When we call you back, we'll hear from at least a couple of people, or maybe I'll just ask you to put it in the chat. But spend a few minutes talking about the implications of this. And if you're not in that category, please stay in this room. I think you should not receive an invitation. Let's see how this works. Here we go. Opening the rooms now. Oh, that's not what I intended. All sorts of things are odd are happening. Let's try that. Opening the rooms now. Let's see what happens. Just wait a second, Steve. Steve, can you jump into room 3, please? Sue and Hassan.
Hi.
Hello, welcome. Lovely to see you. Now, Sue, I know you signed up for one of my recorded courses very recently.
Yes. Which
Have
I
you had
done.
chance?
Yeah, I have.
You've had
And-
a chance
and
to look at it?
Yeah, I did do a clean language course a long time ago in Marion Way, but it seems in the dim and distant past, and I'm not very confident about using it. So I
Okay.
think I use clean questions when I'm working with my clients without even thinking about it. But I'm not cognizant of what I'm doing, if you see what I mean.
Okay. And Hassan, how did you come to be here?
Oh, well, I mean, I was introduced to clean language during COVID. I think Sharon Stone ran a series of things. That's when I found about you. And initially, I thought it was some very specialized technique that clinical psychologists use to get to the bottom of traumas and things like that. But then more and more, you know, I work in IT, so I talk to and resolve people problems and things like that, business analysis. I do a bit of product management. And what I feel is that sometimes when you ask and have a normal questions, normal conversations with people, you find that they'll tell you what needs to be done or how it needs to be done, but they were rarely able to talk about the why, you know. And and sometimes I would say, like, if I ask a bit more why questions, people would get frustrated. And that's why I wrote that question. I know it sounded silly in this community probably, but and I also read your article, Judy, before coming. Is like, how do you introduce clean? And I think the best way is to acknowledge their problem and then use that as a baseline and then kind of build questions on top of it, but not go too clean, because too clean is too, I don't know, like I am open and I'm intentional in to be open to answering and to be open to answering clean questions. But if somebody who doesn't know this technique, like, he might feel that, he might feel berated, or he might feel that trying to make fun of them, or or just, and and that so I'm here to learn about, how can I incorporate clean into my day-to-day work so that I can get to the why more concisely, as opposed to saying this whole story and then trying to elicit was some requirement, or does that
It
answer?
does. And your question, by the way, I thought was a good one, but I think it's easier to answer in a small group than in the whole group. So would you, for the benefit of the tape, as they say, would you mind saying your question out loud?
Yeah. So I guess my question is, like, when you have to use clean language questions in a setting where you're trying to elicit some sort of requirements, some sort of feature requests or something like that to a user, how do you create that space where, one, well, we already talked a lot about the psychological safety and the intention needs to be present before you bring clean in, but how do you make them introduced to clean beforehand? Do you ever do that, or is it just part of the way you conduct yourself that you will bring clean in it, you know?
I think it depends quite a lot on the context, why you're using clean, and what you want to do about it. So if the question already allows you to ask questions, so for example, you're doing a piece of user research, I wouldn't necessarily need to do anything apart from just ask the question. Oh, you're interested in that button. What kind of interest is that interested? It's a perfectly reasonable question. Another question that slips past people, they don't notice you're doing anything strange, is the one that Robert mentioned, which is, and when problem, what would you like to happen? Particularly if you repeat back the problem. Oh, people feel it's weird. And when people feel it's weird, what would you like to happen? It just slides past people. But if you want to ask a whole series of questions in a context where questions are not expected, then it's worth adding a softener. Now, it's not strictly clean to add softeners to your questions, but it helps. So you're in this big meeting with lots of autonomous agents that Rob was mentioning, and somebody expresses an opinion. You might want to say, I'm curious about that. Do you mind if I ask you a question about what you just said? And then ask, and what kind of is that? Sue, does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Yes. I think sometimes if you just jump in with clean, it can feel a bit powerful, a bit too strong, or a bit weird to some people.
And always, if it's a casual conversational situation, don't ask more than 2 questions on the bounce. 2 questions max, move on. If you go, you know, both of you probably know that I can ask these questions for hours on ends and nobody will. But don't do that, because it can go really deep, really quickly. And it can feel very uncomfortable. The opposite of psychological safety. It can feel that you're being grilled, that that someone's trying to prize information out of you or whatever. And that's not okay. But used with an appropriate intention, which such as we're using these to help people to be curious about each other, help you to find a way to ask each other questions they wouldn't normally ask, then you can do something warm and interesting with them. Now, I'm going to have to call the group back. It's a ridiculously short chunk of time to try and do an introduction to this stuff, but it was that I'm going to hit the close rooms button, and that gives us 60 seconds to talk about, was that useful? And what would you like to know next?
Any resources you can share, Judy, about the software stuff? I know you've written an article about that, but in tech, I know you work a lot with agile coaches and, you know, coaching tech teams and things like that. Anything that I can take back and I can practice, bring into my practice, anything you've written or...
Let me have a think about what I've got, because I think about 2/3 of the people on this call are in the software industry in one way or another.
Okay. Okay.
So people like Kerry Paulson, Frank, Clem, I think Heidi. So of the people who are still here, most of them are in the software world. I'm just trying to think what resources there might be specifically for that, but leave that with me and I'll try and email something around.
I know there was a time, or it still came at the wrong time.
Did everybody think those breakouts were too short?
Not by too much, and we've got to finish on time.
We do have to finish on time. So I'm going to ask you to share something in the chat. Having heard all of this, and this goes to everybody, including the people who were not discussing that in their breakout rooms, let's have a quick share in the chat. Having heard all of this, what would you like to happen next? Mm. Yeah. Yes, Heidi, I'm curious about how this can happen in action learning. It would be, yeah, interesting question. And with 1 minute to go, I'm going to share again that link to the next event, which will be the next free event towards the end of January. And if you'd like to join the free clean language training that I've got access to, please, it's very, very basic, but it will get you started. If you'd like something to get you started, email me, judy@judyrees.co.uk.
Or indeed, if you've got access to an organization, and maybe it would be great to see more of it getting settled into that department, organization, company, or whatever, then this might be useful.
And as some of you know, Steve and I are newly freelance again after 2 years inside a consultancy. And
give us work.
Give us work. We're looking about us. If you know of anybody who might like the kind of things we can do let us know. And if there's stuff that you'd like us to put on, trainings, those kind of things, it's always good to learn from the community. Before we close, thank you very much indeed to Robert for being in the hot seat. Big round of applause. We've all learned so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thanks everybody for coming, and see you again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Robert.
We'll hang around here for a minute if anybody wants to say or ask anything.
Just one very quick question. Are you going to send the link out to this recording by email, or how's that going to work?
By email tomorrow.
Perfect. Super. Have a lovely Christmas all, and many thanks.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Bye, Carrie.
Bye.
Quick question for Robert.
Yeah, Barb.
Are you free to develop a course on this kind of stuff?
So there is a course. So that's where I got my coaching certification through Leader Factor. So I can offer those courses. But again, I think one of the things I've discovered is the resources. They're the Tim Clark. I think they're out of Utah. They give so much away. So if you use those links, you can get the ladder of vulnerability, the 4 stages behavioral guide, their resources section. It's chock full of useful things. Facilitated conversation would be very not unlike what we did today. Really, it's interesting what if I had to do it over again, you know, I think that those dialogues, what's meaningful and relevant for individuals personally, I find to be so much more interesting than me talking. But you know, I love how what's interesting to me is, you know, what does this mean? What does this what would this look like in your context, with your challenges, with your interactions? I find that to be very rich and instructive, aside from the theory itself.
And I think,
but I'm happy to, if you like.
I think I've frozen.
Yeah, well,
Oops.
yeah, your picture's frozen, but we hear you.
Yeah, Barb, we
Can you
we
hear
can
me?
absolutely connect. And is that better?
I think it might be
Barb?
us, Judy. I'm not sure.
I'm
I
going
don't
to
know,
stop
we
the
hear-
recording unless you think there anything else should be on the recording. I'll say happy Christmas and thanks to everybody for listening.
Okay, thank you.